a fundamental or central part of the research of both of you is focused around the nature of money. And just to sort of set the scene, could you perhaps talk a little bit about the nature of money and particularly explain to non-economists what fiat money is and what the implications it has for policy formation?
Okay, I'll go first. Well, the conventional view and what we're taught in the very basic economics classes is that you had this Robinson Crusoe and Friday, and they had to barter coconuts for fish. It was very inconvenient, so they came up with a medium of exchange. Maybe in the beginning it was seashells, and then so on, and we have the evolution of money starting from that. I never believed that story. First, I know that society didn't begin with Friday and Crusoe, and I know that money is much more than a medium of exchange. So I rejected that. And originally, I focused my work on the private bank creation of money. And we can see that bank money is just a liability of the bank. A bank deposit is a liability of the bank that we can use as our asset. And I saw government money as being a liability of the government, just as bank money is a liability of the bank. So that is the way that I started studying money. Then we'll need to get to the question of why is it that people accept these liabilities? Why would you be willing to accept a bank liability to hold as your asset? Why would you be willing to accept a government liability to hold as your asset? So I'll come back to those.
Yeah, I came into it from a different angle. And my early work was, as I've explained many times over, was employment focused, that stemming from that concern about unemployment. And at the time I was studying at Melbourne University, I was studying agricultural economics in what was then the fourth year of the Melbourne University program. At that time, one of the very topical issues in agricultural economics were the wool price stabilisation scheme. And this was run by the Australian government through the Australian Wool Board. And it basically required, it was a scheme to meet the demands of the rural lobby in Australia, which was extremely powerful given how conservative a country we are. But the scheme was that they would agree on a fixed price for wool for the farmers, and when the market was trading poorly and not buying as much wool that was being supplied, of course, unless something else happened, the price would be bid down. And so the Australian Wool Corporation, government body, bought that wool up and stored it, and therefore guaranteed the price of any season. And then, of course, the opposite might have been the case when the supply was poor relative to demand. Then the Wool Corporation would sell the wool out into the open market and thereby stabilise the price. And I guess I wasn't so much interested in wool at the time, but I saw it as a full employment of sheep scheme, and I was more interested in full employment of people and trying to understand why we were moving away from a government framework that had maintained full employment for post-war period up until the late 70s. And so I thought of this way in which you could, and I call it the job guarantee. I used to call it the buffer stock employment model, but of course it had the acronym BSE, and it was unfortunate given the cow disease in Europe some years ago. So I went back to the traditional American terminology of job guarantee, Wendell Gordon and that. But the point I'm making is that was my early work, that to develop ways in which you could run buffer stocks of jobs to maintain full employment. But of course then, as soon as you open your mouth, you're immediately confronted with, well, how the hell are we going to afford this? And what are the macroeconomic consequences of this? And I approach labour economics from a macro point of view. I'm a macroeconomist basically, and so I then had to start working out how this buffer stock employment scheme could fit into a macro framework, and that led me to start really trying to understand. And at that time, we were just evolving out of a fixed exchange rate, convertible currency model, which I'm sure we'll talk about in more detail soon. But this was, the evolution of the gold standard model, where the gold standard had collapsed and the US government had become sort of the default, US dollar had become the sort of default gold standard. And this placed severe limitations on what a national government could do. And we were just evolving out of that. Not many people really understood that evolution. And certainly all the textbooks that we learned out of didn't understand it, and still don't. And so that really led me to think about the idea of what a monetary unit was, which wasn't backed by any valuable commodity. And of course the backing of a valuable commodity immediately gave people an incentive to use it as a means of exchange, because they knew it was convertible. So what are the macroeconomics of a currency that doesn't have that characteristic? And well, it's been a long journey, but that's where I started thinking about the macroeconomics of this little idea I had about a buffer